Thank you so much. I'm the project coordinator. My name is Nola D'Souza. We are the Australian Fungicide Resistance Extension Network, otherwise known as AFREN. And we're a network that's a GRDC-funded project bringing together plant pathologists, fungicide resistant experts, and extension services from across the country. And our aim is to develop and deliver all regionally specific resources that will help mitigate the impact of fungicide resistance in Australia. So today we have two of our expert pathologists on board to give you an update of disease and fungicide resistance management in the southern region. But before I introduce them, I'd just like to point out to you all, we have a large number of people on with us today. So we'd like to ask you to go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions, which I can then direct to Josh or Harry at the end of their webinar. I'd also like to ask you, if you have the chance, that we'd really appreciate 10 minutes of your time after our webinar to finish a survey for us. The survey is designed so that we can learn that what we're providing you is what you actually want to hear, and also so that we can continue to learn and adjust any of our webinars appropriately to what it is that you're seeking from AFREN. If you are unable to do the survey straight away, we also have a link to it on our website, which is at afren.com.au, and I'd highly recommend going to have a look at their website as well, so you can get lots of further information about fungicide resistance and management. So I will start off now by introducing you to Dr. Joshua Fanning. He's the research leader for plant pathology at Agriculture Victoria, and his portfolio covers a team responsible for diagnostics, horticulture and greens research in Victoria. Josh's specialist research focuses on managing pulse diseases through integrated disease management practices. And he's aiming to optimise grower profitability and ensure longevity of both genetic resistance and pesticides. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Nola. I'd like to start by just acknowledging those that have made the time to attend today, but also those that have helped me with this research. So on the screen, you can see a few co-authors from New South Wales DPI, SARDI, and Centre for Crop Disease Management at Curtin University. And most of us are co-investments with GRDC, the Grains Research and Development Corporation, and our state agencies or universities. So acknowledge them for the investment in this work. So I'm going to go briefly over pulse disease management. Should have probably changed the title at the start. I'm going to cover off soil-borne disease management in cereals as well in this presentation. So I'll start off with, if the screen will move. The screen's not going to let me move. There we go. If you don't listen to anything else that I say today, this slide probably sums up a lot of what we have to say. So in terms of integrated disease management, it's about sowing clean seed, ensuring we've got good crop rotation, choosing resistant varieties, monitoring for disease through the season, understanding your seasonal risk, and then optimising the fungicide strategy. Some chemicals need to be applied before rainfall events, but most are more effective if they're applied before rainfall events. And then some products, particularly in pulses, if there's growth after that spray, it's often unprotected. Sprays are preventative, not curative. And then in pulses particularly, we're about protecting the seed quality because it's marketable based on that visual inspection. So I know we can't adjust some of those today, so we're going to talk about seasonal risk and what to do in a season like this throughout it. And that's why I've added on soil-borne diseases. Slide. Here we go. So I don't know that I need to tell everyone what the year-to-date looks like. This is the year-to-date in terms of rainfall deciles. It's been a much drier season. In Victoria this year, we're starting off with 0 soil moisture in most areas, particularly in Western Victoria, similar to what South Australia was last year. And South Australia is in the same position essentially as what they were last year, starting off with much less soil moisture. When we look at the last couple of months, things have started to equalise. We're still drier than average over the season, but we've started to see more rainfall fall. So we're seeing above average rainfalls for the last 2 months across significant areas of the southern region and our cropping areas, although there are still large pockets that are average or below average rainfall. So in pulses, we'll talk about fungicide resistance, and this is about all I'm going to talk about. We're seeing fungicide resistance across a lot of our crops at the moment, and that's through the use of fungicides. We're obviously seeing the pathogen evolve, which is causing resistance. And these are all this is the latest update from Curtin University, which shows all the different resistances that are found across Australia. Now, I'm going to be focusing on pulses for most of this presentation. So I'm going to cut out all the cereal foliar diseases. And when we cut out all the cereal foliar diseases, we're essentially left with three fungicide resistance. So we've got in the northern region, mung bean powdery mildew, and then in the southern region, we're seeing botrytis grey mold of chickpea resistance to groups 1 and 2, and ascochyta blight of lentils, group 1 and 2. These are lab detections, though, for both ascochyta blight and botrytis grey mold, and we're not seeing field failure at this time. So essentially, if we continue on with good paddock rotations and a good integrated disease management strategy, minimising our use of fungicides and rotating our use of fungicides, and those strategies we talk about today, we won't see this list grow. And we can see most of this list has disappeared when we take off the cereal foliar diseases. So positive news story in pulses, but let's hope we don't start to see it go the same way as cereals, which Harry will follow on from me talking about across the southern region. So where are we up to with the season this year? Well, my take on it is most areas across the southern region are 1 to 2 months behind where we normally would be. Starting to see inquiries of ascochyta blight and lentil, particularly in Victoria. We're seeing chocolate spot and cercospora in beans. Haven't seen any ascochyta blight in beans come through as inquiries yet. So you can see the plants, these have been in the last week, certainly across Victoria. We're seeing those foliar diseases start to come through. And even though we've seen with that dry season, we are still seeing significant rainfall events or little rainfall events across Victoria, and certainly dewy mornings and foggy days, which allows those foliar diseases to occur. So thanks to Dodgson Medlin and BCG for these pictures. I've used them from their inquiries. But essentially, if we're seeing ascochyta blight in lentils and it's starting to cause stem breakages, then that's when we're going to have to start to control the diseases. And if we're only seeing small amounts of ascochyta blight in lentils at this stage, unless it really gets going, it's probably not going to be a massive risk until we start to see it in significant levels within a paddock. And then it's about protecting our seed quality. We're still unsure of how much yield loss due to ascochyta blight and lentils. On the other hand, across both beans and lentils, if we can keep our plants cleaner, and particularly in beans, it's important. It's about reducing chocolate spot or botrytis grey mold in our lentils, chocolate spot in our beans later in the season. So they're botrytis is a necrotrophic fungi, loves to feed off dead material. So if we already start that September-October period with large amounts of dead material through our plants, then it's just going to allow botrytis to come in. So if we can keep them reasonably clean earlier in the season, it does help with that botrytis and chocolate spot control later in the season. So the first part I like to cover off with now is about correct disease identification. So we do see foliar symptoms due to a lot of significant issues, and they may not just be disease. Yes, we've got viruses, they are a disease technically, but you've got abiotic conditions that can cause it, water stress, or this picture taken in 2022, this lentil crop was under 10 centimetres of water. So essentially that's going to cause waterlogging issues. So are we actually looking at disease, and have we looked across our paddock to make sure it is disease? Or is it nutrition? Is it herbicide? What other factors are going on? Is it localized? What proportion of the paddock? Often we can just start to distinguish a lot of these by looking at where our spray rigs have gone. Is it one boom width that's causing this issue? Is it the whole paddock? And then we can start to narrow it down. But the important thing with disease control is we want to make sure we're controlling disease. We're not using fungicides to control our abiotic conditions or herbicide symptoms. So I'll start with cereal soil-borne diseases. So here we've got several cereal soil-borne diseases. And on the left, all my labels are gone. Let's hope I can get them back up. We've got take-all on the left, which is a black base of the stem, usually found in wetter seasons. Crown rot, we can see that honeycomb colour going up the stem, and the really telltale sign is that pink fusarium growth that real pink colour is really distinguishable of crown rot. And that's usually found worse, or the symptoms certainly exacerbate in a drier finish. But we will still see crown rot even if we have a wetter season. It's just not going to affect our granule losses as much. Rhizoctonia there in the centre with the spear tipping, and then root lesion nematodes are pruning the roots back, and they're just generally discolouring the roots. They're the main soil-borne diseases that we're worried about when we're talking about cereals. We've got a new national investment that's just kicking off across all the states on a lot of these diseases. And so I wanted to talk about some of the cereal, stubble-borne cereal pathogen surveys that we're starting to do. So Steve Simpendorf is heading up the crown rot research, and he's offering a service that we can do that Predict2B tells you how much inoculum is in the paddock, but it doesn't actually tell you how many plants within that paddock actually are affected. You're basically picking up that stubble-borne inoculum, and it's giving you back the level of load, and it is related to yield loss. Predict2B is highly reliable for that sort of conditions, but this research here, which Steve is doing, is telling you how many of the main stems actually have that crown rot in there. So if you can do that across a paddock, you can see whether it's just localized in some areas or whether it's across the whole paddock, which will help with our management. The other interesting thing that we'll start to be looking at is around Victrado and the new fungicide from Syngenta on this that does quite well at controlling crown rot. And so we're interested in that pathogen load plus and minus Victrado. And so we'll be looking at that into the future. But at the moment, if you are interested in knowing what that load is across, basically we can then start to work out the risk in your paddock. So there's surveys across the southern region that'll be looking at that. We can see here across the agroeconomic zones, you can see that there's still a significant amount in Victoria and South Australia with crown rot. So these are currently from Steve's studies that we can see there's a few paddocks, 7% of paddocks had high, very high fusarium crown rot, and 7% had very high levels. A whole lot had medium, so we're talking about 50% of paddocks having a medium crown rot level, which you can see granule losses as a result of. And our Predict2B is very good at detecting that, but these studies will show us what proportion of the plants in a paddock will be affected. So if you want more details on that, there's a testing protocol, and if you want some kits sent out to you, you can go contact Chloe in Victoria. Blake's heading this research up in South Australia, or nationally, Steve Simpendorf at New South Wales is heading that up. So we're going to be probably plugging this more and more in the next 12, 18 months. As we go into harvest period, it's probably a better time to be sampling that. And then you'll get a really good idea. This is a free service for next year. So I know Predict2B you have to pay for. Still highly reliable, going to give us our yield estimates, but this is just another way of getting our crown rot risk without doing a Predict2B for those growers that are reluctant to spend that money. Or also understand the proportion of plants in a paddock affected. So pulse soil-borne diseases, this is a newly, or not new, I suppose, from my perspective, it's about 5 or 6 years ago we started looking at this research. So looking at Fusarium, Diademella, root lesion nematodes, Pythiums, Rhizoctonias, Phytophthora, whole range of diseases there. We can see healthy roots at the top, and you can see that there's very little root structure of those Fusarium-affected plants at the bottom there. So by looking at our roots, digging them up, it's highly important to look at these. The latest research project that's just finishing up was led by Blake, and we got some really good results out of that. By digging up your plants and looking at them, this next slide shows how important that is. So if you can look at the percentage of roots affected with disease in a paddock, and we were seeing quite high levels in all our survey work. So we were seeing up around the scores 4, 5, and 6, so above 50% of roots affected in most of our lentil crops. That we look at, seeing similar data in faba beans, and often they can be worse. We can now show here, this graph shows lentil root health due to Fusarium avineseum, but we can see, even though we've got low yields on that y-axis on the left-hand side, we can see with an increasing proportion of diseased roots based on this root health score, we can see a decreasing yield. And so we can go from 0.6 tonnes down to that sort of 0.2 tonne per hectare. It'd be great to get these results across some more average seasons, but what that really shows us is that root health is really related to grain yield. So if you're worried about what you're seeing in your paddock, dig the roots up, have a good look, and you will still be able to relate that back to grain yield loss. And this data from Chloe in this last project was really good on determining that, and really highlights the importance of digging those roots up. So to move into foliar diseases, I'm just going to flick through a couple of pictures. This is Ascochyta blight. You can see on the bean on the left-hand side, really distinguishable by a brown lesion, white in the centre with little black dots. They're called pygnidia. We can see it affecting the tops of lentil plants in the middle top, some seed, and then down the bottom we've got some chickpea, vetch, and some pod infection. Really important to keep Ascochyta blight levels at low levels. We're not seeing huge amounts of yield loss due to Ascochyta blight, but it's really about controlling it to protect your seed quality. If we get rainfall when you've got pods out there, pods are highly susceptible to Ascochyta blight, and that's where you're going to start to see your grain quality losses more than anything, which is going to downgrade your crop and reduce that economic potential of your crop. Botrytis grey mold, this is pictures in lentils. From a pathologist point of view, beautiful grey fluffy mold, as opposed to Sclerotinia white mold, where you see the white mold instead of grey mold. So you can see that fluffy growth. You can open up the canopy when it's really bad, and you basically get the spores waft straight up into you. Affects the pods as well, down on that bottom right. So that's what we're looking out for as the season starts to warm up. That prefers warmer temperatures. Chocolate spot caused by the same pathogen, we can see here. It's often really hard to distinguish spots in beans, and I get questions all the time about distinguishing them. We often see a mix of both Cercospora and chocolate spot and Ascochyta across our plants. So really highly likely you've got a mix of pathogens there. Telltale sign for chocolate spot is those brown lesions on the flowers when flowers start to come out. That's the telltale sign that it's chocolate spot in there, and it really affects seed quality if we let it get out of control. The thing to remember with Botrytis grey mold is it affects all our crops. So Botrytis cinerea goes across all our crops. So even though we may have a good crop rotation, if you're growing lentils and faba beans in close proximity, or lentil wheat lentil, or bean wheat and back to beans, if you've still got that previous stubble in the crop, then you've still got those spores that can basically come out and cause disease in the following season. And if you've got a heavily infected vetch crop next to a lentil crop, then those spores will come across from your vetch crop. So some of that control is about understanding that cross pathogenicity or cross-contamination of those spores. So the first stage of understanding your disease risk, I talked about things we can't control. I understand we can't control varietal resistance at this time of the year, but the best thing is to know your varietal resistance, because that's going to inform your risk moving forward. If you have a highly susceptible variety, then you're going to need a very robust fungicide management plan if seasonal conditions eventuate in disease or they get conducive. So you can access the latest pulse and cereal disease guides here. I think they're the most up-to-date ratings. They will be on the NBT website, and the South Australian and Victorian crop sowing guides, I imagine, will be out in the next couple of months as well. That will have the updated guide, updated ratings in it. They're usually released February, March. And some of those ratings have changed across cereals, so it's really important to grab those up-to-date varietal resistance ratings. If you're growing a resistant crop, then we're just wasting money putting fungicide on it in most situations. So that's why it's so important to know your varietal resistance rating. So in terms of pulse disease management on fungicides, it really depends on those risk factors. If you're growing lentils in close rotation or a crop in close rotation, then you're obviously going to have a higher risk of diseases being found in those crops and affecting grain yield loss. So that's really going to inform your fungicide management plan, along with your varietal resistance ratings and those weather conditions. So just generally in pulses, to talk about that, Harry will cover cereals. We really need to be thinking about those 4-node sprays if we're seeing severe disease, and particularly in our beans, to keep them clean throughout the season, because beans are usually grown in that wetter environment. So they're going to be much more susceptible to chocolate spot. They're usually much more susceptible to chocolate spot in terms of varietal resistance than our lentils in most cases as well. So we've really got to be thinking about those canopy closure fungicides in every season, and 4-node sprays in most seasons as well. And there's a range of products we can use on that. Then in a season like this, we really need to be thinking about, do we need that follow-up risk? We may have changed because it has been a drier season, that canopy closure spray to a cheaper product. But remember, if we have done that and the season does eventuate, we need to be quicker and more on the ball in putting out those follow-up fungicides in susceptible crops if we start to see conducive conditions. But it really depends on those seasons moving forward. And I'm not going to go into exactly fungicide choice here because there's a range of products and basically you pay for what you get. But it's good to rotate around those fungicide choices and options. I often go with those higher value or recommend the higher value products up front because we don't know where the season's going. They give you the longest control and they can't be used later in the season. Whereas your groups 1s and 2s, prosimidone, carbendazums, can be used later in the seasons along with the Amistar extras, Veritazes. So you group 3 and 7s, 3 and 11s. 3 and 11s can be used later in the season. So what's the season going to do this year? I'm not a betting person, so I go to Dale's seasonal forecast. This is great for Victoria. He stopped doing it for South Australia. Sorry to the South Australians that are on board. But basically the models are showing it's going to be a wetter than average spring. However, Dale can't see any of those precursors at the moment there. So I really do wonder whether it is going to be a wetter spring. But if it is wetter, all the models are showing that it's going to be warmer. And that's, if I was a betting person, I'd think that it's going to be warmer. I'm still trying to work out whether it's going to be wetter or neutral moving forward. But what we do want to prepare for is if it does become wet and warm conditions are really going to be conducive to botrytis. So we're going to have to be hot on our fungicides, particularly on our beans, because they're so much more susceptible to chocolate spot, but in those susceptible lentils as well. So it's really thinking about that. If we're getting wet, warm conditions, got humid canopies for days on end or even a day or two, botrytis and chocolate spot can really get going. So we've got to really watch that. In terms of our fungicide options, I know this article is 12 months out of date, but it does give a whole range of fungicide options. If you jump on the field crop diseases, you can see that there. I've tried to bring it, all the APVMA registrations and permits into one small document that should just give you the options across pulse crops. And you should be able to look at which of those are. And the AFREN guides also give you an idea of some of those pulse rotations. So in summary on the management that I've covered, it's really about varietal selection. In soil-borne diseases, we don't really have our varietal selection, so we're looking at paddock rotations, so we move straight to our non-chemical options. But in our foliar diseases, we do have the varietal resistance, so we're really looking, start with that good base and that good foundation, and this is also where we're going before we go to our fungicides. And understanding our fungicide risk. So if we know we haven't got this solid foundation, then we're relying on our paddock rotations, stubble management, good hygiene, and sowing times, essentially to get that next level of control. And then after that, if all else fails, we should be left with our fungicides. And hopefully we keep basically rotating our fungicides so we're not left with fungicide resistance occurring in pulses like we're seeing in cereals. So one last thing before I hand over to Harry, I'll just give a plug for our field crop diseases identification workshop for Victoria. For those in Victoria, we're running a workshop. It'll be a full day workshop covering off pulses, cereals and canola later in the season. That'll be in October. Registrations haven't quite opened for the actual workshop, but we've got to register your interest, and these people that register their interest will get about a week head start on those before the registrations come out. And I think we've got about 30 on that list already. And we may only have 60 places for this training. And we do it over several days. So it'll be a single day workshop, but we'll repeat it over a couple of days. So that's just one last plug for that. And I'll hand over to Harry with questions at the end.
Thanks, Josh. That was really good information for everybody. I hope you all got something really good out of that. We'll move on now to Harry Dadu. He's the sub-program leader in pulse pathology at SARDI now, where he's in charge of the pulse disease program. His research focuses on developing integrated strategies for management of foliar diseases in pulse crops now at SARDI. However, previously he worked with Josh Fanning at Ag Victoria, and he was a senior research scientist there in Horsham, where he led the cereal disease group for Victoria there. So I'll head over to you there, Harry. Thank you.
Thanks, Nola. Hello all, good afternoon. I'll quickly talk about fungicide resistance management with more focus on triple mutant resistance or triple fungicide resistance that was detected recently in netform net blotch, and then move on to general disease queries for this season. Yeah. All good. This is the latest fungicide resistance status chart. I would call it as an emoji chart. Josh used rainbow color chart, and this one is emoji, but all has similar information, but this one has a little bit extra information or extra details in terms of which fungicide active, especially in DMIs, are active enough or has resistance. This was developed by Louise Fanning for a crop alert that she sent to Victorian growers in March this year. But since then, unfortunately, we have had some more developments. One of those mainly was the detection of resistance in group 11s or triple mutant resistance for net blotch. And for spot form net blotch, we did detect resistance in SA for a sample that was collected in York Peninsula, and that was detected in lab. So currently, we don't have any information on field failure for that in spot form, but there is a lab detection, so which means it is an alert on its own for us to consider that it might be coming into field very soon. And in Septoria, we did detect quinols strobilurin resistance in SA in 2022, and then it moved to Tasmania later, and in 24 we have found it in Victoria as well. So that is again one more reason for concern. Again, is fungicide resistance. And powdery mildew, there is no change, but a lot of fungicides, as everyone knows, we have got resistance in powdery mildew in wheat. So in quick snapshot, there is a lot of not many happy emojis left, and there are only very few happy emojis, which means we only have few fungicides that we can actually use. And more importantly, the vulnerable groups include phenols and STHIs. So these are the groups which we are losing quite rapidly. And you can see that net form, we lost STHI group, which is used as a seed treatment significantly for controlling net form and spot form. And then we have strobilurins, which we found resistance recently as well, both spot form and net form. And in Septoria, as I just mentioned, we have detected in 2024 in Victoria and SA as well. So those are the groups which I would probably be careful when I'm applying for controlling these diseases. And also when it comes to DMIs, there is still few options left, but we are trying to make sure to maintain those groups stable rather than overusing them and making them fungicide resistant. Having said that, I'll now move on to triple mutant resistance that was detected in netform net blotch. So I would like to give a bit more information about this. What we have, what CCDM has done is between 2023 and 24, they have received significant number of samples from netform net blotch with suspected for fungicide resistance. They have established DMI resistance and also STHI resistance in both Victoria and South Australia for quite a while now. But in the recent testing, they found that there is a sample which actually had resistance to quinols, that is group 11s or strobilurins, whatever you call, along with STHIs and DMIs. So that means in a single sample, there is mutation for 3 different fungicide groups, which means those mutations can actually confer resistance to those fungicides, and also which means that you can't really use those fungicides to control any of those 3 fungicides to control the disease. So this is quite concerning because those are the 3 important groups that growers use on netform net blotch. But unfortunately, we have found significant amount of resistance, which means in going forward, we may not be using any of these fungicides very effectively to control netform net blotch. So just to give us an example, I have some data from last year, NVT trials, which were conducted in Hamilton and Canaiva by BCG and SFS groups, respectively. The chart here shows disease ratings of different varieties. One is highly resistant, and the scores on 9, which is showing red color, are highly susceptible. And if you see at RGD Planet, RGD Atlantis, Xena, Spinnaker, Elista, and to a part Neo as well, you can see that there is disease. And in some of those varieties, the disease is very high, which is highly susceptible or highly rated. So this is despite after application of 3 to 4 fungicides in each of those locations. In Hamilton, we had fluxopyroxide as a seed treatment, which is an STHI, and then at flag leaf stage, we had Procero or prothioconazole, tebuconazole, which is TMI groups. And then at 49, we had azoxystrobin, which is group 11, and epoxiconazole. Despite applying 3 to 4 fungicides, we are still seeing the amount of disease that was present was nowhere to have in comparison when you what you expect from fungicides. So that is the condition by having those fungicide resistances in the paddock, which means your disease won't get controlled, and eventually you'll lose yield, and also financially you'll be spending a lot of money for no reason. So on the other hand, the advice is using resistant varieties. You can see other varieties starting from Rosalind, Kiwi or Bottler, Cyclops, Maximus. They are all having reasonable or decent amount of resistance in them for net form, and so they haven't really got any disease on them. And also fungicides did work controlling disease on those varieties. So the message throughout my talk would be about using more resistant varieties. And this is one first step where I'm trying to explain that the benefit of using resistant varieties. And where this triple mutant resistance has been detected. So CCDM has confirmed 4 locations at this point of time. One is in 3 are mainly in York Peninsula in South Australia, which is Pascoe, Corny Point, and Warukah. And in Victoria, they have detected in Stratham, which was a site, NVT site for Victorian region. And among those 4 locations, the variety, there is one thing common, the variety, which is either Xena CL Plus or RGT Planet. So those are the varieties which have highly susceptible rated for net form, net blotch. And that also once again reiterates the fact that if you're growing susceptible varieties, there is high chance that these pathotypes or probably the resistant pathotypes will be more vulnerable, more infected with, and that also shows that we have to encourage using more resistant varieties. And now the question again is, can this resistance spread across the states or beyond those 4 locations? The answer is definitely yes, because net form, net blotch can travel long distances through ascospores, which means they can travel from Stratham to other place, Butchick, or probably Oyen, for instance, in the Mallee. So there is every chance that you will find resistance to every location. But again, it is a paddock-based, paddock to paddock, it varies, and you might have to get tested. But if you look at the life cycle of net form, net blotch, it has sexual phase and also a sexual phase. It basically survives on stubble, and stubble produces the sexual spores, which are called ascospores. And these are the spores which actually have those genetic mutations which move across to new crops, and then they infect new crops, and that's how the mutations generally carry. And upon infection, those new lesions which come up, they produce conidia spores, and those are the asexual spores, but still they can carry the mutations that are passed on from ascospores. And that's how the disease and the mutations actually carry from one crop to the other crop. And the other pathway that they have is through infected seed. And net form, net blotch is also a seed-borne disease, which means your mutations can be carried through infected seed as well, especially farmer-to-farmer grain exchange. Whenever it happens, there's a chance that the previous infected seed can be carried on to the other farmer from other location, and the disease can be carried, and along with it, there is fungicide resistance as well. Apart from that, the management practices also will be very influential in increasing the level of fungicide resistance. That includes growing susceptible varieties. As I've shown, all the detections so far have been on susceptible varieties. That is one important reason why we want to suggest to move on to resistant varieties. And also sowing barley into barley stubble, which means another big trap where we can actually increase the amount of disease that into a new season. Along with it, if there are mutations in those stubble, then we'll be carrying those ones into the new season as well. And more importantly, repeated use of fungicides. There is always a message from AFREN team that don't use too many fungicides or don't use more than once for a mode of active. So those messages need to be taken seriously so that we can actually manage fungicide resistance and also the stop the spread. So to understand how far the disease is spread, I went back and looked into a pathotyping data that Tara from SARDI actually produces this for net form net blotch. It is very interesting data. So Tara understands different existence of different pathotypes across the country, not from South Australia, but across the country. So she collects samples every season on an annual basis. And what she does is she puts across differential set, which we call basically differential set includes a lot of different barley lines with known resistance to net form net blotch. And she scores the response from each of those lines for different pathotypes that were collected from the country. As you can see the heat map here, the ones on the greens are actually highly resistant, or the varieties are highly resistant for different pathotypes, whereas those ones which are red in color or high nines, they are highly susceptible in their reaction. And if you see in this table, I got those isolates which were detected with triple mutant resistance, one from Stratham, which is in Victoria, and the other one from Corny Point, and the other one from Pascoe. So those one common thing between those three pathotypes is that the reactions were very similar for any of the variety that was chosen from the differential set. Just as an example, you can see RGD Planet. There is score of 8 for Pascoe pathotype. There is Corny Point. It is also scoring 9. And then there is Stratham one also scoring 8. And for Neo, they are scoring 7, 8, and 9 respectively. So those indicate that these pathotypes are common and also have fungicide resistance, and also which means they're highly significant in managing our disease program. And then to understand if there are any similar pathotypes anywhere in the country, then I put together data again. I found there are pathotypes which are very similar in their reactions across different parts of the country. One is in Burchip, which was even more aggressive than what the fungicide resistant pathotype was. And then we did find a couple of pathotypes in WA, which also had similar resistant responses to different isolates, different genotypes, comparing to the fungicide resistant pathotypes. Those data or information actually indicate that these pathotypes are quite widespread, and it is only a matter of testing that we have to do. And if you find any suspect, please feel free to reach out to the state pathologist and send your samples, and we probably will arrange those testing for you through CCDM. And once we get those information, we'll play back to you, and you'll be able to know like what level of fungicide resistance is available in your paddock. But in a general scenario, assume that once the state has been detected with a fungicide resistance, you assume that it is probably present everywhere across the country. And also you might need to take care of alternative strategies so that you reduce and control fungicide resistance management. So what are those, when we talk about strategies to control fungicide resistance, so what are those strategies? So Josh already covered this. He had a normal triangle. I have an inverted triangle, but both of them are same. Always start thinking about variety selection is your base, and then move on to other strategies, which we generally call as cultural practices or integrated disease management strategy. And the last option is always fungicide. So don't have fungicide as your base, but have variety selection as your base. So I'll talk about those benefits now with a few examples for net form net blotch. Variety selection. It is important to review National Varietal Trial disease guide and also state disease guides, which every state produces these days one. Always review for the latest ratings. If you see a rating has changed for a particular variety, you probably have to align those fungicide resistance or fungicide management strategies in a different way to that particular rating. For instance, in cereals, we have ratings which say from MR to SVS, which is MR is moderately resistant, MRMS, MS, and S is susceptible, SVS is susceptible to very susceptible, and VS is very susceptible. If you have a variety which is SVS to VS, you need to use fungicides. And if you're using a moderately susceptible variety, then there is a less chance of using a fungicide in every season. In most seasons, you will be okay without a fungicide. And for that fact, we did do field testing in a GRDC funded project with Deeper Queensland. What we have identified is when we compare two different varieties with two different resistant ratings, one is RGD Planet as shown in this figure, and then Titan AX, which is a moderately susceptible variety. We did find yield losses of up to 20% in RGD Planet, and we have to use a fungicide there. But whereas with Titan AX, which was a moderately susceptible variety, we didn't find any significant yield loss for net form net blotch. So that shows, and once again, reiterating the same message, that using moderately susceptible varieties or better varieties might be easier option, so that you can avoid fungicide usage and also sit really thinking and not thinking about fungicide resistance issues. And the other important factor that I would recommend for managing net form net blotch or having it in mind or in plan is the yield potential of your paddock. What is the yield potential of your paddock, irrespective of or regardless of resistant rating variety? If you are using for net form and spot form, if your paddock has less than 3 tons per hectare potential, that means you don't need to worry about either of those two diseases, because irrespective of amount of disease that will be present on your crops, you won't see major yield losses from disease. But if your yield potential is greater than 3 tons per hectare, depending on the resistance of your variety, then you will see yield losses starting from the disease. And the highest yield loss can be highest yield loss can be found in your greatest yield potential crop. For example, here 7 tons per hectare crop was found with 35% of yield loss in susceptible variety. So those are the instances where you actually have to put emphasis on using fungicides, but rather than in your 3-ton crop, I would probably recommend not to use a fungicide for that. And the other strategy that we pathologists recommend is paddock selection or crop rotations. So for barley, especially for net form and spot form, do not grow stubble barley onto barley, which means you're encouraging more disease if you're doing that. The other option is grow some other crop. It can be canola, it can be wheat, or it can be pulses. If you're choosing any other crop apart from barley on barley, then there is high risk of less risk of disease, and also you're reducing incredible amount of inoculums going into the next season. And the research has shown at least a minimum of 3 years to be given between two barley crops, so that you can reduce inoculum significantly. And this is also another advice, not just for a person or a grower in a paddock, but this is for a community-wide advice. So it is important that agronomists get together across a community and have a chat about this, and also encourage others to follow the same, so that you are reducing that risk, not just for your paddock, but across the community in a wider sense. And when it comes to the last and least most important strategy, that is fungicides, first thing is avoid unnecessary usage of fungicides. Don't use fungicides prophylactically. Just think about what is the situation of your paddock. And in barley, not every disease or symptom is considered as a disease. There is barley is very typical. They produce a lot of physiological symptoms which actually look like net form. So there is a chance that you need to get into touch with a pathologist for diagnosis, and then confirm whether it is a disease. And if it is a disease, understand how much of epidemic is actually happening in your paddock. Is it too bad? Then also consider whether you need to apply fungicide afterwards, thinking in confidence with whether that is existing at that point of time. And we also say late epidemics are of less concern. If the crop already has crossed, for instance, flowering stage, then there is very less chance of any epidemics becoming causing yield loss. So that is also an indication where you don't need to use a fungicide. And more importantly, wherever there is fungicide resistance known to exist, remember not to use those fungicides which already have fungicide resistance. And also on resistant varieties, as I've shown examples previously, you don't need to use fungicides on any of the better rated varieties. It is only when you're using a susceptible variety, always have a plan to use fungicides. And I want to talk about Net Blotch app, which also is helpful to understand when to spray and when not to spray. This is an app which is very similar to a StripeRust app, which was released in 2020s. And then there is other app which is Blackleg in canola as well. This app is very similar to those and is also developed by Deepwood Western Australia in funded with GRDC. So what this app is, as I said, it actually helps you to put through a lot of information into it. As you can see from the screen, there is options to put the location and the state where you are, the target yield of your paddock, and also the variety, the disease information, and also the fungicide information that you want to apply. So once you input those options, there is a screen which actually shows the benefit from the sprays or also what is the scenario if you don't spray. So this can actually help you like in terms of dollars as well. What is the dollar of benefit that you might get if you use a spray? Based on those calculations, you will be able to decide whether to go for a spray or not with your disease scenario in your paddock. And this app is actually free on iTunes or also Google Play, and also is available on iPhones and tablets. So please utilize this. There's a lot of positive feedback on StripeRust app and also Blackleg in canola. And this might be a game changer, especially in the scenarios where we have fungicide resistance. That's about netform net blotch and the triple mutant resistance. For more questions, please reach out any of the state pathologists. It'll be useful to know like to get samples and also to understand what level of fungicide resistance that is there in the ground. Looking into 2025 for other wheat cereal foliar diseases, we have no reports of StripeRust either in Victoria or in South Australia, but there are reports of StripeRust detection in New South Wales, which is a close state to Victoria, so which means there's a chance that it might flow in if the conditions are very conducive and if the varieties that are being grown are susceptible. So the other important factor that we have to keep in mind with StripeRust at this point of time is the duration. If the StripeRust is detected for say in September or later, then there is less chances of it causing a big epidemic and also big disease yield loss. Whereas if it is getting detected in August and your crop is at growth stage 31 or 39, then I would say probably you need to look into fungicides. But otherwise, if it is detected very late in the season, then don't need to risk with fungicides. The other disease that we have reports of being cited is septoretricide blotch in South Australia, more particularly in high rainfall zone, whereas not many reports that are coming from Victoria at this point of time. Once again, septoretricide blotch is highly rainfall-loving disease. So if you have more rainfall, there is a chance that disease might pop up in susceptible varieties. The other disease that people are always worried about in South Australia is powdery mildew. Fortunately, there's no report of powdery mildew being cited at this point of time. But with the weather being conducive, there's a chance that it might be popping up in susceptible varieties as well. We spoke about resistant ratings. For StripeRust, there is a change in ratings for a few of those varieties. Please refer to the National Varietal Trial Disease Guide and also State Guide, and also Josh has put up those QR codes for both pulses and cereals. Refer to those guides as well for the update on latest ratings. Here are some of ratings which are changed for the premier varieties that are grown, especially in Victoria and South Australian regions. Tomahawk CL Plus has been changed from MSS to S, Scepter from MSS to S, Cesario from RMR to MRMS. So these are the changes that we have seen in StripeRust in the last season. Moving on to Septoria once again, we did conclude a big project with GRDC, especially co-invested by Agriculture Victoria and SARDI, where we have looked into different varieties, different trials. In fact, and this particular data that is shown here is coming from variety yield loss trial. Once again, I want to reiterate the fact for any disease, irrespective of any crop, the importance is using resistant rated varieties rather than depending on susceptible varieties, as shown in this graph. Lancer, which is moderately susceptible variety for septoretricide blotch compared to Scepter or Impala, we have seen yield losses are significantly less. And in terms of money as well, we have found in 2022, there's a benefit of $268 per hectare compared to Scepter, and also in Hammer CL Plus, there is nearly $203 per hectare in terms of benefit especially in those in high rainfall conditions such as 2022, and also which means there is no need of using fungicides once again in those situations. Just by using a moderately susceptible variety, we've been able to get a lot of benefit in terms of money as well. Moving on to barley quickly, I've spoken about net form and spot form, but yeah, we have detected net form this year already, and spot form, there is reports of spot form as well. Please be monitoring your crops for symptoms, and if you find any symptoms, please let us know. And also, if you need to know about fungicide challenges, we'll be happy to help. Scald, we haven't seen anything, any scald yet in either of the states. Same goes with leaf rust as well. Loose smut might be a thing that comes later in the season, and rhizoctonia has been around, and Josh already mentioned about it. So there's few diseases that you might be looking into in barley space. And oats is something that I haven't really touched in the past, but what we have seen last week in South Australia, we have detected septoria leaf blotch, red leather leaf, and bacterial blight all in one crop. So that shows that there is disease, and especially in oats, there are several susceptible varieties for these diseases. And if you are monitoring those symptoms and also taking necessary strategies, it'll be helpful. Please get in touch with us to know more about management strategies for these diseases. And as you move later into the season, if this season becomes a rust season, then you might see crown rust and stem rust. But the chances are very less, given that we didn't have incredible amount of green ridge starting in summer this year. So there is less chance of rust. But with regards to the other diseases, definitely there are plenty. And in summary, at this point of the time and for the rest of the season, monitor crops for your symptoms, and more importantly, know your varietal resistance. If your resistance is significantly high, which is highly resistance, for instance, then there is less chance of using fungicides. But if your resistance is highly susceptible variety, then you might have to have a fungicide strategy depending on the weather conditions at the moment. And again, there are apps which I have just explained about net blotch. There is Triprest app as well. Those apps will be very handy in unpredictable conditions, because it will be the first step to understand whether you need to spray a fungicide or not. But in every possible case, please reduce the use of fungicide so that we can actually limit the fungicide resistance, and also move using those fungicides for a little longer. Otherwise, we'll be losing all the fungicides. That's it for me. And finally, thanks for a lot of groups across the country for this presentation. More importantly, Agriculture Victoria, from which I have used their data, and GRDC for the investment, and SARDI for cereal disease data, and rest of the groups which are collaborators in every project that we work with. Thanks.
That was excellent, Harry. Thank you so much. It's a lot of information for everybody to digest, and really good for everything that we need. Thank you. I would just like to put forward that can you please go ahead down in the Q&A section if you would like to pose a question to either Josh or Harry, and I can ask it for you. Just having a quick look what we have. So far, nothing. Maybe while I'm talking. Thank you so much for joining us all today, everybody. We would really appreciate your feedback on this afternoon's webinar. When you exit the webinar, that will automatically come up. It will take less than 10 minutes, and it just helps us to definitely see that what we're providing you is stuff that you really want to hear, and just let us know how we're going so that we can provide as best information that we can in the future. So we really appreciate everybody coming along today. Looks like there are no Q&As to happen. So at this stage, I'll probably let you digest all of that information that we got from Josh and Harry. Thank you both very much for presenting that for us today. And we'd like to say that if you need to get in contact with either Harry or Josh, they're quite open to having any of your questions, or even to AFREN as well. You can get in contact with AFREN if you have any specific fungicide resistance questions by going to our website or emailing any of us. So thank you all very much, and hopefully, please, you can do that survey for us. Thank you. We'll leave it there.